In the words of Pope St. Pius X, the Holy Mass is a prayer itself, even the highest prayer that exists. It is the sacrifice dedicated by our Redeemer at the cross and repeated every day on the altar. If you wish to hear the Mass as it should be heard, you must follow with eye, heart, and mouth all that happens at the altar. Further, you must pray with the priest the holy words said by him in the name of Christ, and which Christ says by him. You have to associate your heart with the holy feelings which are contained in these words, and in this manner you ought to follow all that happens on the altar. When acting in this way, you have prayed the Holy Mass. The most perfect way to follow the Mass and assist in it is by using a Missal. So in this presentation, we're going to talk about how to set up a Missal, what the Missals you might be able to use are, and what the differences are. There are a few different types of Missals that are available here in the United States that you can use. They include the Father Lasant's Daily Missal, the 1962 Missal is published by Angelus Press, and the New Marian Missal. Those are three of the more popular ones. The one that I like most is the St. Andrew's Daily Missal. So I'll be showing you how to set a Missal up using the St. Andrew's Missal in this tutorial. This is the front page of St. Andrew's, and you'll see that the imprimatur on this is July 8th, 1953. So that means a couple different things. That means that it was promulgated or published before the 1962 Mass that we are used to seeing was promulgated, and therefore there are going to be a few differences. They're minor, and we'll go through and talk about them a little bit. So this was in accordance with the typical Mass that was promulgated by some changes in 1945 and 1953. But like I said, essentially it's the same Mass with a few differences, and we'll talk about those as we go through. What I really like about the St. Andrew's Missal is it has many historical notes spread throughout the Missal. It's got some stunning sacred line art that we don't see in more modern Missals, and some very rich explanation of many aspects of the liturgical season. For every Sunday and most feasts, there is typically an elaborate description of the feast and its historical content. But before we cover how to set up the Missal, we should cover the feast days themselves. So what we have here is a snippet of a traditional calendar. You should have one of these in your home. Which is a calendar according to the 1962 books, which is different than the calendar of the modern Mass. So let's just take a look and see what kind of information is on here. So if you look at the top, you'll see the 15th is the Feast of the Assumption. So this is a snippet from August. So you'll see it's a holy day of obligation. That's what the calendar tells you. It tells you the feast name, the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And it says 1 CL. That means it's a first class feast. And the white after that tells us that the vestments will be white for this day. It's interesting if you look at the day before, which is the Vigil of the Assumption. That's a second class feast, and the vestments are violet. So typically in the liturgical calendar and in the church, the Vigil is a day of preparation. There are some third orders that have this as a day of fast and abstinence, but it is a day of penitence in anticipation of the feast, so the vestments are violet on that. So that's the 14th and the 15th. If you look below it, you'll see on the 21st, we have the feast of St. Jane Frances de Chantal. She's a widow saint, so that's a third class feast, 3 CL. The vestments again are white. And then again on the 22nd, we have the feasts of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. That's a second-class feast with white vestments. And a little bit of extra complication. If you look below it, you'll see the names of 3 martyrs, Saints Timothy, Hippolytus, and Symphonian. And so on this particular day, the 22nd, every year, the priest also says prayers in commemoration for these 3 saints. The reason that they're on the 22nd probably has to do with the day that they were martyred on. But what that means is that when we say the Mass of the Feast of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, there's also 3 extra prayers that the priest says, an extra collect, an extra secret, and an extra post-communion, and they are to commemorate these 3 martyrs on the 22nd. So that's the calendar. So going into Mass, you should know what the feast day is. It's just really helpful. You could probably find it in the Missal, but it's always good to know going in exactly what you're going to see. So take a peek at your calendar before you go to Mass during the day or on Sundays to double check what we're going to be celebrating that particular day. The priest also has a set of instructions in the sacristy which he reviews before he vests. And it's in a book called the Ordo. And the Ordo has an entry for every day of the year. And it tells him exactly how the Mass is supposed to be celebrated as far as the things that are different in the particular Mass of the day, depending on the feast. It also tells him how the divine office is different. So remember, the Mass is just part of a set of liturgical happenings in a day that start off with the priest's hours of matins, vespers, and prime, usually before the first Mass. So if there's anything different about those and anything different about what's allowed for the day, for instance, some days are such that you can only say certain types of Masses. It just depends on the feast day. Anyway, that's all contained in the Ordo. So you can see this page of the Ordo. It's taken from August 6th, and you'll see in the upper left-hand corner it says August 6th. Right below it, ALB. That's Latin for white, so that tells us that the vestments are going to be white for this day. It's August 6th, so it's the Feast of the Transfiguration of our Lord. The SABB before that means it's Saturday. That's Latin for Saturday. And it tells us that the Transfigure of our Lord Jesus Christ is a second-class feast. And then it tells us what offices the priest has to say. You could see some notations that says at MAT, that's matins and nocturnes, and then there's lauds, and then the hours, and then prime. So it says at lauds, at hours, at prime. Those are all the different instructions for how the Holy Office is to be recited by the priest. And then when it comes to the Mass, the PR means that there's a proper Mass for today, PR Mass. Also, there's going to be a commemoration of Saints Sixtus, Felicity, and Agapitus. So again, those are commemorations that will also be added to the Mass of this feast. Usually if it's a sung Mass, the commemorations are not always kept, but they always are kept in a low Mass. So again, there's an additional collect, secret, and post-communion in your Missal applying to those 3 martyrs. And then below that, it says that we also say the Credo. So the Credo is only said on Masses of second or first class. So typically the Credo is not said for Masses of classes 3 or 4. And then the common preface is said for this Mass. And then it has it has a note below it saying, today the votive Mass of the Immaculate Heart of the Blessed Virgin Mary is prohibited. So the reason why that note is there is because this is August 6th, so it would be the first Saturday of this particular year. But they're saying that because the Transfiguration is a second-class feast, the third-class votive Mass of the Immaculate Heart is not allowed today, even though it is a first Saturday. So your first Saturday obligation is still fulfilled by the Mass that's said, but they just can't say the Mass of the BVM on this day. Okay, so let's talk about the Missal itself. Most of the Missals are similar, but they're not arranged in the same way. So the different sections may be in different parts of the Missal. So I'm going to tell you today for St. Andrew's does not necessarily apply to the other Missals. They do have sections the same way that the St. Andrew's does. They sometimes just reorder them in different ways. So in the St. Andrew's Missal, it's broken up into about 7 different sections. So the first section is the Sunday Masses chronologically. So in the very front of the St. Andrew's Missal, you're going to find all of the Sunday Masses from the beginning of the liturgical year, which is the first Sunday of Advent, through the end of the liturgical year, which is the last Sunday after Pentecost. Then the second section in the St. Andrew's Missal is the Mass itself. So you're going to find it in about the middle of the book. Section 3 is called the Common Masses for particular saints. So there's some saints that don't have a proper Mass written for them. They could be any class of saints, martyrs, confessors, virgins, not virgins, bishops. In this section 3, we have what's called the common masses for those saints that don't have a specific Mass written for them. The next section is section 4. It's called the proper of the saints, and these are all the weekday Masses, usually beginning at the beginning of the liturgical year, which usually is the Feast of St. Andrew. So November 29th is the Feast of St. Andrew. That's typically the first saint day of the new liturgical year, even though it may fall before the first Sunday of Advent, and then it goes through roughly November 28th of the liturgical year. Section 5 of the St. Andrew Missal are votive masses. So there's what's called votive masses. We're not going to go into them very much, except that on a ferial day, which is any day that doesn't have a feast day assigned to it, the priest has the option of saying a votive mass. And there are several different votive masses, and they're in section 5 of St. Andrew's Missal. Section 6 are local masses. So if there's masses that are particularly celebrated locally but not universally, they're in this section of St. Andrew's. So St. Andrew's particularly has Feasts of the United States in it and Feasts of Great Britain, because St. Andrew's was originally a British version of the Missal. So, for instance, there may be, for instance, the Feasts of the North American Martyrs at Orisville. So those feast days are not necessarily celebrated universally, but they definitely are celebrated in the United States. So you may find the Feast of St. Isaac Jogues and his companions in this section called local feasts. And then the last section, section 7, is called the Kyriale, and that's where the chant is for all the different sung masses. Okay, so now we're up to setting up the Missal for any one particular day. You can't really set up your Missal to be able to handle all the masses in a month, say. You really have to set the Missal up day by day, and there's a formula to follow. So first of all, the ribbons. So the ribbons really mean nothing as far as their color goes. So you can put any ribbon on any page that you want. What I usually try and do is make it so that the ribbons aren't stretching across the whole Missal. So for instance, as you look at this picture of the ribbons, you'll see the purple one is on the left, then the gold, then the green. I wouldn't try to mark something at the very end of the Missal with the purple ribbon. I would try and keep it towards the beginning. So for me, in the St. Andrew's Missal, purple ribbon, which is the first one, I usually use it to mark the Sundays of the year because they're at the beginning of the book, so that's usually pretty convenient. And then again, we're going to set each one of these ribbons up for a particular feast day and then see how we can reference them. Now, depending on the feast day, this could get very complicated or it can be very easy. Sundays, for instance, are very easy. You really only need one ribbon because that's the only proper that we have for that particular day. So assuming you may use a couple ribbons to mark different parts of the Mass, You really only need one ribbon on Sunday to mark the propers for the day. Okay, so let's mark some masses. So we'll start off with the easy one, Sunday. And so what I'm showing here is the fourth Sunday after the Epiphany. You see my purple ribbon there because that's the first ribbon kind of left to right in my Missal. So it's not a stretch to put it on this page. I mark this page and I'm done. Boom. What I usually do during the Mass, for the Mass, is I'll put a ribbon at the start of Mass and I'll put a ribbon at the credo, because usually I close my Missal for the sermon, and then when I want to go back to it again, I'm always going to just go back to the credo at the ribbon, and then flip back for the offertory, which is going to be at the purple ribbon. So Sundays are really easy, one ribbon. I'm just going to point out I chose fourth Sunday after Epiphany particularly because this is one of the nice things I love about the St. Andrew's Missals. So for the few days that are at the end of Pentecost, where we pass the 23rd Sunday of Pentecost, and then we've got 2 more Sundays left, say, or 3 more Sundays before Advent, but we've run out of Sundays after Pentecost because there's only 23 and then the last Sunday. So we always have to fill them in at that time of the year with the Sundays that we skipped after the Epiphany because Lent came early. So for instance, I have the fourth Sunday after Epiphany here marked. Now, in every other Missal, usually you have to mark multiple ribbons between the 23rd Sunday after Pentecost, and then you have to flip back and forth because the introit is going to come from one Mass, and other readings are going to come from the other. When you get, for instance, the 24th Sunday after Pentecost, some of the readings are going to be from the 23rd Sunday, and some are going to be readings from the Epiphany. But St. Andrew's Missal takes care of all that for you. So all you have to do is go back to the fourth Sunday after Epiphany, for instance, in this case, and you'll see there's 2 introits. One is marked after the Epiphany, so that's the introit you would say if you actually were reading the Mass for the fourth Sunday after the Epiphany. And then you see the second introit says after Pentecost. So if you were in the Pentecost time of the year and you're referring back to get some of the readings from the fourth Sunday after Pentecost, well, you could just mark your ribbon here and do the whole Mass from here because it's got both in them. There's no other Missal that I know of that does that for you. So one of the pluses for the St. Andrew's Missals, at least as far as these few Sundays between the end of Pentecost and the first Sunday of Advent. All right, so let's set up a simple feast day. So let's go to October 8th. This is the Feast of St. Bridget, Widow. So you can see from the Missal that it's a white Mass of the 3rd class. It says double, but in the new in the 62 Missal, a double is a 3rd class feast. And there's a little bit of explanation about who St. Bridget was. Anyway, so what it shows us for her feast on October 8th is that the Mass is going to be Coniovi, and it's at page 1133. So when we talk about the name of a Mass, the name of a Mass always comes from the first few words or the first word of the introit. And in this case, the Mass of the common Mass of a saint who's a widow, but not a martyr, is Coniovi. Excuse me, and that's on page 1133. So you would set a ribbon at that Mass on page 1133, which would have all the propers of that common Mass, with one exception, the collect. So the Church has written a special collect for the Feast of St. Bridget. So you would keep your ribbon on the common Mass, again, Coniovi on 1133, but when it came to the collect, you would turn back to this page, so you'll have a ribbon set for today's date, October 8th, then you'll have another ribbon that's set for the common Mass, which you'll set before Mass. So all you have to do is remember that all the common prayers in the Mass, the introit, the collect, the gradual, the Alleluia, the Epistle, the Gospel, etc., all come from the Mass Coniovi except for the collect. And it shows us what the collect is here. It also tells us that there's a special epistle that they want us to set for this particular Mass. So now you're going to need a third ribbon on the epistle, which starts with the word carissimi, and you'll find that as the Missal says here on page 1136. So for this Mass, Feast of St. Bridget, what you'll do before Mass is you'll go in and you'll set the main Mass to Cognovi, page 1133. You'll have a ribbon at the Collect, which is this page right here, and then you also have to set another ribbon to the epistle. So the epistle is a special epistle for this Mass. The Church has decided that, and you're going to turn to that epistle for the epistle of this Mass. That's a simple feast day. It's fairly typical of what you'll have to set up. Sometimes only 2 ribbons, but sometimes 3 if they've given us another special reading like this epistle. Okay, here's a really easy feast. So this is the Feast of St. Michael the Archangel, and you'll see in the Missal September 29th that the whole Mass is together at one location. So here's the introit, the collect, the epistle, the gradual, the alleluia, the gospel, and the offertory, secret, communion, and post-communion, all in one place. No extra ribbons to set for propers, and when it happens this way, it's beautiful. Here's an example of a feast in which the whole Mass is in the common for this type of saint. So it's a little blurry here, apologize for that, but if you could see it, you would see that the Feast of St. Martin was a pope and martyr. So the Mass is Si Diligus Me. You can see that there, hopefully, a little bit. And that's on page 1046. And there's no other propers that are particular to St. Martin. So the next day is St. Didicus, and there's nothing in between the two. So the entire Mass for St. Martin is going to be the St. Diligus Me. So if you turn to page 1046, then you'll see the Mass. You'll see that the first 3 words of the introit is Si Diligus Me, and once again, that's the way they name the Masses in the traditional Latin Mass. And the whole Mass is here, all the propers. So briefly, that's how you set up your Missal. Remember that the different missals that you may have or you may choose to buy will all be a little bit different in their arrangement, but the concept is always going to be the same. So using this setup, you should be able to set up any traditional Latin Mass missal that you have. The daily missals are the best, so sometimes you'll find, for instance, the St. Joseph Sunday Missal, which just has Sundays. My recommendation is to get a daily missal. Again, they're richer. And for your young ones, when it comes time for First Communion, one of the things you might think about is instead of getting them one of the small children's missals to help them learn the Mass, you might want to actually get them an adult missal. Of course, they'll have to be taught that they're expensive and they need to be treated with care. But I remember as a first communicant a long time ago, my parents bought me a full adult missal, and it was very amazing to me, and I treasured it as the rich gift that it was. So you may think about that if you're a parent and you've got some young ones that are about to make their first Holy Communion. Thanks for listening. Hope this has been a help. God bless.